Alpha-1 is a genetic disease that can cause big health problems, even if you just carry the gene for it. It's different from other diseases where being a carrier is not a big deal. For Elvis, this disease affected his health, especially in the 1970s. In a healthy person, the liver makes a protein called Alpha-1 that goes to the lungs to protect them from harmful things we breathe in. But if you don't make enough of this protein, your lungs aren't as protected, and breathing in toxins can cause damage. Over time, this can lead to serious lung problems and even the need for a lung transplant. If someone has the full version of this disease, it can also hurt their liver. So, even though Elvis was just a carrier, it still had an impact on his health. There's a problem with a protein made in the liver. It's the wrong shape and size, so it can't leave the liver. This leaves the lungs unprotected from harmful substances. Over time, it causes blockages in the liver and can lead to serious diseases like fatty liver, hepatitis, and cirrhosis. If not treated, it's deadly. This disease is tricky because it doesn't always show up the same way in people and can be hard to identify. It can affect someone with just one damaged gene or both. In the past, like in the early 1900s and 1950s, people didn't know about this disease. They thought Gladys had hepatitis and Elvis had another lung disease. It might have looked like a long-lasting case of tuberculosis for someone like Elvis's grandmother Doll. Despite her illness and disability, Doll had 8 more children between 1906 and 1922. Elvis's mom, Gladys, was the 5th daughter in this big family. After Gladys, 3 boys and another daughter were born. Some of the children had health problems, and Tracy had the most difficulties with a limited mental capacity. Sadly, 6 of Doll's 9 children passed away before they should have. This pattern of not living long continued in the next generation of the Smith family. Elvis's mom's side of the family didn't live very long, and both Elvis and his mom died in their 40s. A friend of the family, Lamar Fike, noticed this trend. The Smith children, including Elvis's mom Gladys, didn't know about the health problems that would affect some of them. Their family and Gladys grew up in very difficult times in Mississippi, where many people were poor. Cotton wasn't as valuable as before, and many farmers lost their land. They had very little money, with each person making just $132 a year. Elvis's mom faced many challenges growing up, as she was from a poor and uneducated family. The girls in the family had to do even more work because they had to take care of their sick family members and work in the fields too. Gladys didn't go to school for long because she had to help with the cotton fields. When she was 28, she said she only finished 5th grade. In the 1920s and 1930s, there were 2 big problems: the Great Depression and a flood followed by a drought in Mississippi. Many banks closed, and people in Mississippi didn't have much money for a long time. In Elvis's family, something very sad happened in 1931. Bob, who was the main worker in the family, suddenly became blind and died. He had always worked very hard to support his family, just like Elvis would later on. Before he died, Bob managed to move from being a sharecropper to having a bit more control over his living situation. When he passed away, his wife Gladys, who was only 19 at the time, had to find a new place to live for herself and her siblings. They all had to start over with different family members. Because of difficult times, Gladys and her family moved to East Tupelo, where they had family to help them. Gladys found a job at a clothing factory and worked very long hours. She made friends with other women there, including Faye, who became her best friend. They lived in a small house, and Gladys could finally earn money every week. This is where she met Vernon Presley, who would later become Elvis's father. In those days, girls started looking for boyfriends when they were very young and got married by their mid-teens. Gladys was worried she might not get married by the time she was 20. Religion was very important in the rural South, and people believed everything happened because God planned it. Elvis's mom, Gladys, and dad, Vernon, met at a church called the First Assembly of God. They were young and thought they could have a good life with a big family and a home they could own. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they hoped to make things work. They had simple dreams before their son, Elvis, became famous and achieved things they never even thought of. In the 1930s in Mississippi, it was hard for people to have happy dreams because things were very tough. Money and opportunities were scarce, and life was difficult. Even in the late 1930s, Many families in Mississippi didn't have things like radios or telephones in their homes. Vernon and Gladys, who would become Elvis's parents, knew hardship too. They both had tough lives, and so did their families. But when they met, they were young and hopeful for the future. They borrowed money from friends to get married in secret and lied about their ages to make it happen. They wanted to start their life together, even though times were tough. Gladys, Elvis's mom, said she was 19 when she was really 21. Vernon, Elvis's dad, said he was 22 when he was actually 17. Gladys sometimes forgot her age, and in a census from the 1940s, she said she was 26 when she was actually 28. Vernon was honest about his age. On papers, it looked like Gladys was older than Vernon, but not by the true 4 years. However, on Elvis's birth certificate, she admitted to the 4-year difference. People didn't notice this change in her age until after Elvis passed away. People often said that Elvis believed he would die at the same age as his mom, who passed away at 42. After Elvis died at 42, it seemed like his prediction came true. Elvis thought a lot about his mom's death and might have felt that he would also die young. His mom, Gladys, died when Elvis was in the army. He visited her grave many times and knew she was born in 1912 and died in 1958. However, Gladys sometimes changed her age when it suited her, like when she married a younger man. This story is about the beginning of Elvis's life in Tupelo, a place that was important to him. Everyone knows Elvis Presley, the famous singer called the King of Rock and Roll. He wore fancy clothes, had lots of money, and lived in a big house. But to understand the real Elvis, as a son, husband, and father, we need to look at his childhood in a town called Tupelo, which is in Mississippi. This town is close to Memphis, and it was an important part of Elvis's life before he became famous. Before Memphis and rock and roll, there was country music, and for Elvis, there was Tupelo. Memphis helped shape Elvis's music, but Tupelo, where he lived for his first 13 years, made him the person he was. In Tupelo, life was very different from today. They still used horses, outhouses, and gas lamps in 1935. Elvis's biographer wanted to show the real Elvis, not just the myth. In Tupelo, Elvis was just an ordinary kid, not knowing he would become famous. It was also in Tupelo where Elvis's mom, Gladys, started having health problems, and these issues would stay with him throughout his life. The Smith and Presley families were very close and depended on each other a lot. They were like a group of people who needed to help each other to survive. They married each other because they lived close by and didn't have much money. For example, Vernon's brother Vester married Gladys' sister Kletz, and Gladys' brothers married sisters from another family. They didn't have much money even during the Great Depression, and they didn't experience the good times before it. The hard times were nothing new for them, especially in the South. In the 1930s, Mississippi was very poor, and the South had a lot of economic problems. President Roosevelt was going to bring some programs to help, but until then, people like Elvis's parents, Vernon and Gladys, had to work hard to survive. Gladys worked long hours at a sewing factory and did other jobs to make extra money. She also took care of her sick mother and sewed clothes for her family. Vernon found odd jobs too. They grew their own food, took care of their animals, and did many things to make ends meet. People who knew Gladys said she was outgoing, funny, and always ready to help others. She was a happy person, even though later in life, she was often shown looking sad in pictures. After getting married, Vernon and Gladys lived with Vernon's dad, Jesse. When Gladys was pregnant in 1934, Vernon borrowed some money to build a house for them. With help from his dad and brother, they built a small 2-room house. This type of house is called a shotgun house because it's narrow and has one room behind the other. If you open the front and back doors, a shotgun bullet could go through the whole house. That's why it's called a shotgun house. In this house, Elvis was born. Even though they were very poor, the Presley family had a home in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1935. They didn't have much education, but they knew how to build a strong house that even survived a big tornado in 1936. The people in that town were smart and knew how to survive. Life was different back then, and Billy Booth from the hardware store said it right. To understand Elvis as a grown-up, we need to know the difficult life he was born into. This will help us see how his life, success, and struggles were connected to the time and place he came from.